Hello students, welcome once again, and now I am going to talk about women's status in contemporary India. We have looked at how the role which women were playing right from ancient period to medieval period and how they are becoming more independent. I have already mentioned in my last lecture about how women's organizations were set up, and there were again a number of organizations which came up after independence. And when you look at these, initially many of these organizations, especially in the early period from 1947 to late 1960s, we can refer to this as a period of accommodation. And then the period between 1960 to 75 was a period of crisis. And then slowly you have the flourishing of a number of these organizations. Initially, to talk with many of these organizations, because we had just become independent, and the biggest struggle during the colonial period was that many of the women's issues got subsumed under the larger issue. See, it was felt that we should become independent. We should, if we become independent, then in that whole euphoria, it was felt that women's issues will be solved automatically because we will be the masters of our own destiny. And many of these women also, put aside these women's issues, because there were some women who were saying that we are fighting at two levels. One, we are fighting the British government, but then we are also fighting patriarchy within our own homes. We are fighting our fathers, our brothers. So all this was somehow put aside, and the only agenda that remained was that we have to become independent and become the masters of our own destiny. And if things will improve, automatically there would be an improvement of women's situation. And initially when we got independence, it was marked with a lot of pain. All of you know that we had, there were so many, because of the partition, many women had lost their lives. There was so much violence against women, and it was the women found themselves joining the general organization. They were fighting against price rise, they were fighting for land, etc. And when the report of the Women's Commission came towards equality in 1975, it really showed that there was no change in women's status. There was a lot of women still, there were various issues with which they were dealing. And whether we look at it on political and economic front, there were so many issues that had come up. And so again, you had a large number of organizations which came up at this time. You had the Rashtra Mahila Kosh, which was established for the National Credit Fund for women. Then you had self-help groups which were started for a large number of women, and they were all trying to bring about change in women's status. But there were two major movements about which I am going to talk in contemporary India. And one was the movement in Uttarakhand, where they were bringing out issues of environment for the first time. And then you had the second was the Arak movement, which took place in South India. So these were very important movements about which I want to talk in contemporary India. What happened in the 1970s and 80s? There was a large scale destruction of forest throughout the region. It was Uttar Pradesh at that time. And then a new movement called Chipko movement started. What they did was, these women would go and hug trees. Chipko means hugging a tree. And they would not allow the contractors to cut the tree. They said, you first kill us before cutting the trees. And over the next 5 years, this movement moved to many districts of Uttar Pradesh. Now, the Chipko movement was as a result of a lot of 100 years of decentralized and locally autonomous initiative. Many of the leaders of this movement were village women who were trying to build in their own subsistence, their own communities. And though many men were also involved in this movement, but leadership role primarily came from the local people. You had in 1971, Dasoli Gram Swarajya Sangh, which gave the right, and it fought for the rights of the local people over forest products. And then you had a large number of other women who started participating. The Chipko movement was not just an economic need or the ecological need of that region. See, these women depended on the forest for their survival, their livelihood. So, the Chipko movement was very inimical to gender. The whole theoretical underpinnings as well as political and economic ones were had a lot of implications on gender. Women and children were the one who were gathering firewood for domestic consumption, and then whatever residue came in the form of rice straw, this was also used, or the as fuel wood by these women. Now, the government had put a stop to all this by giving rights to certain people in this movement. People in the there were contractors who could fell the trees, and the local people had no right over the forest. And therefore, when the villagers in Gopeshwar, they just wanted few trees so that they could make farm tools, they were not allowed. Then you had men like Chandi Prasad Bhatt, who belonged to the Dasoli Gram Swarajya Sangh, and you had a women like Gaura Devi. They really took up leadership role, and they felt that in order to solve our present day problems, we have to establish a harmonious relationship between humans and nature. And this was it was very essential to see that the forests are preserved, so that there is peace and happiness and prosperity in that region. And the Chipko movement was a big success because many people, people visited these regions. They were able to control the forests. The forests were not cut at that time by the people. And so, this was a very important movement. A second very important movement which I want to talk about in contemporary India is the Arak movement, and this occurred in the southern region. Now, Arak is rectified spirits which is obtained by distilling fermented molasses. As a result of green revolution and increase in sugarcane production, we find that its byproduct, that is molasses, also increase, and this was diverted into making Arak. Now, this whole process of making liquor costed the government 1 rupee per litre, but then it would give out rights to contractors at about 10 rupees 60 paisa or 11 rupees, and the contractors in return packeted them into sachets and then they sold it. So, the 812 crore revenue which the government was getting, it was only 1/6 of the total amount by the contractors. The contractors, they were ruling the roost in Andhra Pradesh at that time. They were dominating politics, society and cultural life. They got lot of political patronage. They became policy, over a period of time they themselves stood for elections and became policy makers and decision makers. They also maintained their monopoly by bribing the police, etc. They also diverted a large amount of this money into real estate, building and finance. The whole change of liquor, or the revenue from liquor, which increased, which was only 39 crores in 1970-71, and it increased to 812 in 91-92. This had not come about innocently, or that suddenly people started drinking more. Far from being a trade to cater to addicts, it became a campaign to create more addicts. Earlier, you had something called the Sahara compound outside the village. Both men and women would work throughout the day, and then they would go and have liquor in the evening. But slowly what happened, this arrack was packeted into sachets, and it was brought at the doorstep, very doorstep of these villagers. And the men started drinking a lot. It had a lot of impact on the family. They became parasites. There was a lot of domestic violence. And the movement really started by the literacy program. This literacy program was very different because it adopted a campaign approach. They wrote primers, and there was a primer called Sitamma Katha, the story of Sita, who has a addict husband. She tries to reform her husband, but when he is not reformed, she commits suicide. So the women in Devaganta had a lot of discussion around this issue, and then they went up. They very simplistically argued that if the liquor shop is not open, the men will not get liquor and they will not drink, and their problem will be solved. So all of them walked to the village shop and they asked him not to sell liquor that day. And when he said that, look, my earning also depends, I also have to feed my family, these marginalized women said, we will pay you 1 rupee from our pocket, but please don't open the shop. And that day the shops didn't open, men did not get any liquor, and for 2-3 days there was no drinking in that village. The women thought this was a big victory. There was another primer which came up saying that, Advalu Ekmate, that if women combine together, and all this was attributed to literacy, that women came together, they were able to close the liquor shops. But when this lesson was read throughout Andhra Pradesh, many committees were formed and women came up in large numbers making a simple demand, no selling of arrack in our villages. And soon, the whole anti-arrack agitation turned into a movement when they sought various answers to their question. They asked, why is it that drinking water comes once in 2 days, but liquor is supplied twice a day? They also asked that why there are no good schools in their villages, there are no proper roads, but liquor shops are found everywhere. And slowly you had large number of women, whether it is in Nellore district, in Kurnool district, Chittoor district, they formed various organizations in villages. Women became very dynamic. They started Rasta Roko, roadblock. They did not allow the liquor to come in to their village. And then many of these contractors went into the court. They said that these women are not allowing them to practice their livelihood because their livelihood depends on liquor. And then they got respite for some time where these women are asked to keep quiet and the liquor is sold under police protection. Throughout the agitation, the government kept, it had a stand that it is providing 2 rupees rice to the people. And then the women said that, look, by one hand you are giving, the other hand liquor takes away most of their revenue. And at this time it was the Telugu Desam party which was in opposition. It suddenly became the savior of these women. It raised a lot of hue and cry. It spoke about how women are being treated by these, how they are being beaten. And finally, bowing down to the pressure, the government took a bold decision, and from 1st October 1993, even bearing a revenue loss of 600 crores per annum, they were arrack was banned. However, soon the women's group realized that it did not serve any purpose, because in this period the consumption of toddy increased. There was another kind of liquor called IMFL, Indian made foreign liquor, where the liquor is foreign but the bottle is foreign and the liquor is Indian. So soon the women formed a joint action committee where they started demanding total prohibition. And in a speech, because elections had to be fought in December, and on 2nd October 1994, the then opposition leader from Telugu Desam, N.T. Ramarao, he declared that if his party is elected to power, they will declare the state with total prohibition. In the elections that followed in December, Telugu Desam party got 214 seats out of 294, and in the swearing in on 12 December, he declared that the state would follow prohibition. Now, total prohibition was followed. In the aftermath, in a coup, his son-in-law Chandrababu Naidu took over the reins. He became the chief minister, and now, he realized, he was a very savvy chief minister, and he realized that banning liquor was a populist measure, just as free electricity, 2 rupees rice kilo. But if he gave it up, he would antagonize the women through whose vote they had won. And but then the financial condition of the state was also deteriorating, and so he was in a real dilemma. But slowly, and public opinion also started dividing. The women's group felt that they were very empowered because there was less of violence in the villages. They said, you look at other sources of revenue, and many other people felt that how can the government control their habits? Those people who can afford liquor can have their liquor, and total prohibition cannot work. And slowly, the policy returned, though it was done in a very defensive manner, in a sagged manner. But definitely, if you look at this history of contemporary India, it shows that how women's movement are becoming very strong. And this was the first incidence of articulation of a family violence in a public forum. It was a very spontaneous movement, just like the Chipko movement, where because of the awareness and the literacy programs, they came in. There was no organized leadership. Leadership came from a local initiative. Village became central, and it was women who took decision on the spot. It gave a lot of confidence to the women. They used various cultural forms to propagate the message of drinking, whether it is Burra Katha, Hari Katha, Agu Katha. They used all these cultural forms to fight against liquor, and therefore, these were initiatives which were taken by the women, be it the Chipko movement or the Arak movement. So, in contemporary period, you can see, again many other grassroots organizations which came up, and all of them were trying to improve the status of the women. Thank you.